Great, thank you. So welcome everyone to the June 24th Arlington County Housing Commission Subcommittee on Legislative Priorities virtual meeting. We are authorized to hold this virtual meeting based on the electronic meetings policy that was adopted by this commission at the September 2022 meeting. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a few specifics to orient everyone to our virtual environment. Today's meeting is available to stream from the county website. Audio of today's meeting is available via phone. If commissioners, presenters, or speakers lose internet connectivity during today's meeting, please reconnect with us by phone. For those joining us through Microsoft Teams, please keep your phones and devices muted until you are called upon. Please turn off sounds to any other devices around you to minimize interference. When called upon to speak, you must unmute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon that is located on your meeting command bar. The moderator does not have the ability to unmute you. If you are dialing in by phone, press *6 to unmute. There will be an opportunity for public comment for those signed up in advance. Members of the public are encouraged to provide written comments by visiting the Housing Commission website. The meeting chat is active for presenters or commissioners who need technical assistance only. The meeting chat should not be used for discussion, public comment, questions, or requests for more information. Lastly, this is a public forum. Today's meeting will be recorded and posted to the county website. All information associated with today's meeting, whether written or spoken, is subject to the Freedom of Information Act requirements. Okay, so with that, we can begin. So thanks to my fellow commissioners for joining. I know we have a small group, but I know last year we were able to do some work on the legislative priorities offline as well. So happy to do that again if as time permits for folks and everyone is busy. And many thanks to Jason for doing some pre-work that was helpful. Um, Alex, am I able to share my screen to show the last year's legislative priorities?
I think you should be able to. If you're unable to, let me know.
Yeah, it's grayed out for me, but I don't know if there's a way for me to request to share screen. Oh,
Oh,
okay. It
I
seems
just
to be
made you a
on now.
presenter.
Yeah, okay. Cool. Okay, let me just move this over. And then I
Can I,
will share my screen.
this is Doris.
Hi, Doris.
Hi, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Okay, so this is specifically about recommendations for Virginia General Assembly legislative priorities to send to the county, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure.
No, that's helpful to level set. Thank you for asking. Um, so yeah,
And is it my understanding also that we're not necessarily at this time developing any advocacy strategies that the Housing Commission will undertake because we can't do that until the county board adopts them as their priorities just because of our relationship to the county board. Is that kind of a correct statement?
yeah, I think last meeting, and I defer to Kellen a bit, but I believe our charge is to advise the county board. Um, and therefore, like you stated, any advocacy would have to be at the direction of the board, but maybe Kellen, you could keep me honest or elaborate on that.
I think that's accurate, Nikki. So we can provide recommendations that the board adopt certain things as part of their legislative priorities, but without explicit, I would say, approval from the board, I don't know that we're allowed to engage in any advocacy beyond that.
Yeah,
In our
I was
role
just
as
saying
commissioners,
we
yeah.
can't speak and say the housing. We can't speak outside of that chain of command and say we cannot yet say the Arlington County Housing Commission recommends da 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 da, right? We cannot do that. We can only talk as individuals right?
I mean, we can, once the commission adopts a recommendation to the board, like we can tell whoever we
Yeah,
want about that, but we can't engage, like we can't take that to senators and delegates and say, "Hey, we think you should do this." That's the
but
role
not
of the
until
board.
the board, not until the board adopts them, right?
Yes, and even then, I think the board would have to say, "We want you to go talk to legislators about this," which typically they do not ask us to do that. So, even once the board adopts it as one of their legislative priorities, like, they have a paid full-time staffer whose job it is to lobby on behalf of the board. So they don't typically, at least in my experience, have the commissions engage in any additional advocacy even once they've adopted their priorities.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure because there for some of these things, I know that we have a state organization that's already looking at what its priorities are going to be, and then we also have and there are other commissions and stuff. So I just wanted to that we're communicating with about some housing stuff. So I for the disability community, and I just wanted to make sure of our protocols. That's all.
Yep. I
Thank
mean,
you.
I would like to share what we come up with the Alexandria Affordable Housing Committee as well as the Fairfax equivalent of uh, basically their housing commission. And as I do every year, will share these with the Tenant Landlord Commission, and probably this year the Commission on Aging, because they have a housing committee. And then, obviously, Doris, you're always aware of what we're doing and able to bring things back to the Disability Commission. So that type of sharing, I think, is fine. And I think we should do that. But as far as like actually talking to members of the General Assembly, typically that's, I think, outside of the bounds of our authority.
Okay. Just making sure.
Thanks, Doris and Kellen. Um, so yeah, I think last year we had a great session where we kind of just used it as a brainstorming session and did some work offline. I think, Kellen, last year you mentioned that the board, if we're lucky, will take one or two of our priorities. So just want to keep that in mind because I know some folks are newer to the commission. And I don't want people to do a ton of work and then be disappointed. Maybe that's too strong of a word, but just want to level set expectations. And I know one of the items we didn't include in the priorities last year, but that has been a priority for our commission is the affordable housing ordinance. I know Matt DeFronti said that having that in our list of priorities last year wasn't good timing. Um, Kellen, I don't know if you have an update on that or if, because I believe it's now we have Matt and Susan, and so I'm not sure if they've given you any guidance on where we should go on that or also state law.
Yeah, so the guidance was they did not want us to form a subcommittee to look into
Oh, that's right.
developing recommendations for that. But I do think, given how much time and effort the commission's already sort of invested in talking about how we'd like to see a better deal for Arlington, especially considering that it looks like Fairfax and Alexandria get better deals than we do based off of the statutes that they work off of compared to Arlington's, that it is probably time for us to put on the record to the board that the Housing Commission supports changing the enabling legislation around our affordable housing ordinance, so that our community can benefit more than it does currently from developer contributions or the number of units that developers are providing in addition, as part of the formula. So that's a priority for me, assuming the rest of the commission wants to include that as well.
I think that makes a lot of sense, but others should weigh in as well.
I have a question about that. So Kelly, I know you said that there's been a lot of work done around that, and with this being like my first year, I'm not to go too deep into it, but like the work that's been done, that's been communicated to the board and it stopped there. Like there hasn't, nothing's gone further than that, right? Like to actually talk through the policy of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to work being done, like the Arlington Community Foundation published a report on deficiencies with the existing law and how Arlington's not getting a very good deal. County staff put together a report that basically said the same thing, that they think that the ordinance should be amended and, by extension, the state law, so that Arlingtonians are getting more for allowing developers to develop in Arlington. I've had conversations with other advocates and outside groups who were, I know, looking into this, and there's been a lot of other groups who have done work in this area. And I know the board is really hesitant to move forward with this, and it probably still would not be picked up on their legislative priorities for the next General Assembly session, because they know that um, I I think they're just unsure of how Governor Youngkin would react to that, and what sort of impact having him in the governor's office would have on a major piece of legislation like this for Arlington. So I think there's a lot of hesitancy for them to move forward on this for the next session. But like I said, I think putting it on the record and having us be able to say the Housing Commission supports changing the legislation so that we can get, X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
I think it's time for that. And then we can hopefully, next year, build on that. And yeah, but those are my thoughts. So yes, I've had multiple conversations with board members about kind of general sentiments of the Housing Commission, that we'd like to see this be something that the board works with our General Assembly delegation to change. And the general sense that I've gotten back from the county board is that now is not the right time, which is why we're not going to do a subcommittee that's dedicated solely to focusing on this issue. But I do think it makes sense to include it as part of our legislative priorities package.
Yeah, I think so too. That was probably one of the main topics that, if I remember correctly, when we were discussing what kind of like brainstorming, that was like top of the list. So, I mean, even if it's not the right, quote unquote, the right time, I do agree. I think it's a good idea to put it on record because, I mean, at least from when I've been here, it's like when we're talking to developers, that's the theme, the main constant, right? It's like, how are we going to advocate for affordable housing when we have a bit of a restriction there? So,
Well, and it's one of those areas that if we're looking for, we need more money for AHIF and for affordable housing, this is how you get that. You change the legislation so that developers have to pay more or provide more units. This is, I think, one of the best solutions to getting more affordable housing in the county, by changing the formula so that we get a better deal. And like I said, based on what I've heard and seen from other localities, Arlington is getting a worse deal than our neighbors, because of the language in our ordinance and enabling legislation compared to the one that they operate under in Fairfax and Alexandria.
Jason?
Yeah, just a question, because I think is our affordable. I'm looking at the Virginia code. Is I think our is the enabling legislation. It looks like is it the same for our counties like 15.2 affordable. Is there something different in Arlington's compared to Alexandria's affordable dwelling ordinance?
There is. I would defer to Richard Tucker, who can probably cite the specific, code numbers for. There's my understanding is that Arlington has one that only applies to Arlington and our specific form of government, like the county manager form of government, whereas Alexandria and Fairfax, because they have different forms of government, they operate under a different law. And if you compare them, ours is less beneficial for our community than theirs may be. Not to necessarily say that theirs are great, but they seem to be better than what we have in Arlington.
Can I ask you something about that? So, um, so recently, I've had uh, had an opportunity to be involved in an individual advocacy issue with somebody in Fairfax County um, who has an affordable dwelling unit, and I've never been able to sort out until I had to be close to the mechanics of it all what that meant. I knew they had it, but I didn't understand it. And if I understand it correctly now, or at least in Fairfax, when that properties, and I know I think they do it when they're building them, um, but they may be able to join on after or in this affordable dwelling unit program, and that I guess depending on who is occupying the unit, if they're low income, um, then they get certified. The individual gets certified, as I understand it, gets the unit certified as an affordable dwelling unit, and for this particular individual who is SSI, so her income was very, very low, and it brought the rent on the property down to something like 40% of what it would have been, down from like 2,000 to 1,100, and then she was able to get a voucher, which which brought the rent even further down. So into her SSI income level. So so I'm curious about whether that is equivalent to what Arlington has, or whether Arlington is better, or whether Fairfax is better. But I know that I think the number of units may or may not be capped at some level. And like I said, I'm sorry that I can't give you all the details of that. But the reason I even brought it up was because I'm wondering if you know about Delegate McClure's bill, which would have associated an increase in Type A units, accessible units, to a local option in the affordable dwelling unit program. So does Arlington have, in addition to the AHIF, does it have an affordable dwelling unit program, or is it not in that program? The state, you know, I got the impression we might be in it.
So Doris, and again, staff probably has a better answer, but I mean, my understanding is that what other localities call affordable dwelling units, Arlington calls CAFs. So it's really just a nomenclature difference, but that the units operate in much the same way. But as far as how that works for accessibility requirements, that I'm not sure. Jason, I see your hand
No,
up.
I wasn't asking about the accessibility
Okay.
requirements. Okay. What I was asking about is the affordability issue. Okay. What I'm asking is, I've always wondered, since every time I inquired in Fairfax whether they had something like AHIF and the CAFs, I got the impression they were saying that their ADU program was their rendition, but I didn't
Yeah,
realize
I think that's correct.
that actually the option to have that, and I guess in Alexandria as well, that there are like 6 jurisdictions statewide or something that have ADU programs. That's the way I understand it. So, and I'm just saying, so I was coming, so at this committee meeting, I was just trying to ask. My understanding is that Arlington is not in the ADU program, but then it seemed kind of strange that the delegate had this bill, which has been held over because it got held over. That's why I'm asking. But whatever it was trying to do by a local option per bill was only apparently for those 6 jurisdictions or whatever number it is that had the ADU. And so what I'm trying to find out of is, and what I thought you were referring to is, does the ADU program do a deeper affordability than the AHIF and the CAFs in Arlington? Wasn't that what you were asking, kind of?
I think so. I mean, well, not necessarily deeper affordability. It's more so the formula that the localities have to get numbers of units and or like the developer contribution is different. So it's not necessarily that like Fairfax is getting units that are affordable, up to 50% of AMI, whereas Arlington's getting only 60% of AMI. It's more so that in Fairfax, the same type of development, maybe the developer contribution would be $5 million, whereas in Arlington, it would only be like 3.5 that the county would be getting. So it's more so how much the developer needs to contribute, either in units or in dollars, for basically the site plan process.
Yeah, I just had the impression that the number of those affordable units in Fairfax are far less than the percentage in the Arlington, the way Arlington is set up, because I guess the geography is so much bigger out there. I guess is the issue. Anyway, I'm sorry if I took you off track. I hope I didn't. But
Yeah, can I just chime in again? It just looks like, again, I want to get clarity on the enabling legislation, because what I'm seeing is that 15.2-234 gives localities Albemarle, Arlington, Fairfax, Loudoun, cities of Alexandria and Fairfax the same thing. So I just want to make sure that there's a specific thing that is different. I want to know what's the difference between Arlington because then you have 15.2-2305, which extends for other jurisdictions. So yeah, I just want to make sure, get the clarity before, like, thinking about this moving forward.
Richard, can you speak to that?
Yes, I can, I'm gonna post it in the chat. I'm looking for the specific citation. So I'll post it in the chat so you'll have it. but we do operate under a separate article in the state code, and the language is exactly the same as is in our zoning ordinance, which is, you know, the reason why we're locked into what we do. So regardless of what you see in other sections that pertain to other communities, the language that's in the state code is actually the same that's in our zoning ordinance. So I'll post that as soon as I find it for you.
Thanks, Richard. Back to you, Nikki.
Awesome, thank you.
Thanks, Richard and Jason and Kellen. Okay, so it sounds like, you know, for the folks that spoke up, there's some agreement on, you know, speaking to our recommendation that the county, sorry, Joe, did you figure out how to unmute?
I think I did. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Sure.
Sorry I'm late. Thank
That's
you.
okay. Thanks for joining. That we want to at least recommend that the county look into this more. So I pulled up our 2023 legislative priorities. I'm not sure if we want to work off of that and take, I don't know, Kellen, maybe one or two more in addition to the affordable housing ordinance recommendation, since they don't typically take many, or if we want to just add to this list. I'm not sure, like strategy wise. This is already at what, 2 or 3 pages. It makes sense to add 3 pages to make this significantly longer, or how maybe like strategy wise we want to think about it, and then we could talk about what we want to actually put in there.
So my thoughts on that, Nikki, and actually this looks like, I think it changed a little bit for the final one. But I kind of like what we did last year, which is we kind of put everything down that people wanted to consider, and then we spent time during a meeting going through and prioritizing and saying, okay, out of the, I think there were 9 that we had like included in the draft last year. Then we said, okay, like these 3 are going to be the ones that we actually go forward to the board with. That way we get an opportunity to see all the different options. And then we can, at least in my view, it makes sense to then narrow it down based off of what the potential things are.
Okay, so that sounds good. So we could talk a little bit about adding things to the list tonight, and then folks can work offline to ensure they have what they want added to the overall list before our next meeting, and then at our next meeting we could talk as a commission for how we want to narrow it down.
That makes sense to me.
How do others? Okay, I see a head nodding from Jason. Does that sound okay for others? Okay, great. Thanks, Elizabeth. Okay, so Jason, I know you had a good list, so it sounds like you've already done your piece. I can pull that up. We could also maybe work through this and maybe see what from this existing list that we had last year we want to re-recommend. I assume this first one here around type A accessibility we would want to keep. I think that's still a priority for the commission, and you know, I would assume still a priority for Arlingtonians who are impacted by the lack of these types of units. I'm guessing that if anything, we would just want to make sure that there's been no updates to this kind of supporting information that we have. Does anyone have any objections to keeping this first item on the list for us to consider?
I think the Disability Commission would appreciate having that on there, and there is activity on, you know, increasing the building code percentage still going on. Our state organization of Centers for Independent Living is actually working on that, and other affordability issues as well. and Delegate McClure's bill would include language, but she may be changing that bill. And on the Disability Commission side, legislative state legislative Disability Commission, Senator Favola is now the vice chair. She's just the immediate past chair. Senator Hafsme is now the chair, but also Delegate Hope is on that commission, and we think we're making progress on getting them getting some activity started in the upcoming General Assembly, and we'll be speaking to General Assembly members. So it's now become active, and the other commissions, the Alexandria Commission on Persons with Disabilities, and also in Fairfax and hopefully Loudoun, are going to be supporting stuff like that. So there'll be allies for that recommendation.
That's great. Okay, that sounds good. I can look to see if the commission has any information that we could use to update some of these supporting facts. Kellen?
I just want to add, I just looked up Delegate McClure's bill number. It was HB 1253. So if we want to reference that in the future, it's HB 1253.
Great. Yeah, I think that makes sense to make sure we have something to point to. Okay, great. Anything else on this one? Okay, so the next one, grant authority to Virginia localities to enforce tenant rights and protections under the Virginia Residential Landlord and Tenant Act, especially concerning health and safety concerns. I assume this would still be a priority as well, but
yeah, I mean, since the board has already adopted this and has included it for the past, I think 2 or 3 years probably in their legislative priorities, I think we should keep it, because we've already gotten them to adopt this.
okay. Great.
And it was again vetoed by the governor this last session as well.
Okay, so we can update that.
He's very consistent in his lack of support for tenants.
Okay, so yeah, we can update the bill number and okay.
And this is Joe. I have a question on that since I'm new, and I understand the governor's veto-ness. This had nothing to do with rent increases or anything or stuff like that. This is purely what it says here, right?
Yeah, so this is basically allowing the county attorney to sue on behalf of tenants to enforce existing law, like existing protections under the Virginia Residential Landlord Tenant Act.
Right.
And it kind of stems from like what happened with the Serrano, where a lot of tenants like didn't know how to enforce their rights, and they were like, I don't know how to get a lawyer, I don't know how to like go
Right.
through the court system. So we said it would be a lot better if the locality could actually say, you know, tenants could go to them, and then the locality could say, hey, we'll sue on your behalf.
Okay.
And the Virginia Poverty Law Center like picked it up, and then they were able to work with the like AOBA and the Apartment Managers Association and the realtors to like get it to a place. They significantly narrowed the scope from what it originally was, to
Right.
just focus on health and safety.
Right.
But yeah, so this is a bill that it did get bipartisan support,
Right.
but then
Okay.
the governor
Well,
keeps vetoing it.
that's too bad. I mean, the apartment people and the other people all supported that it was narrowed, but he still vetoed it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So number 3 there, allow general district courts to place residential buildings under receivership when the property manager or landlord repeatedly fail to address significant maintenance, health, and safety issues in the building to ensure that the repairs are made and the tenants reside in an habitable environment. Kellen, I'm not sure if you have any color on this one.
I don't have any updates. I mean, for this one, it was um, the issue that it's trying to address is that you would take a landlord to court, they would be found responsible for not following, their responsibilities under the law. The judge would say, do it, and then the landlord wouldn't do it. And the tenants would continue to suffer. And so the idea here is that the court could basically say, like, after a certain amount of time, if the landlord just refuses to follow the court order and doesn't really care about paying the fines, that they can say, you know what, we're going to place the property under receivership and we're going to order that the maintenance is done. And then we're just going to bill the landlord for how much that costs, because what's important is making sure that the tenant is living in a safe and habitable environment. So it's really meant to address like slumlords who are just like, sure, I'll just pay the court fee, but I'm not making any changes to the building because I don't really care. So this one had a more frosty reception in the General Assembly. But yeah, that's all the color that I have on this one.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful, and the frostiness makes sense. Do we want to keep this one? I mean, I don't know, again, with the strategy, like how much of this is we want to be realistic or also show our consistency across different years. Obviously, what you just went over is important, but I can't imagine it's very realistic that something like that will get passed soon.
I mean, again, I'm fine with keeping stuff on and then we can just take it off later. Like if we just basically use this as brainstorming, like what's on here, and then if people want to add additional ones, and then we can do some more research and further develop thoughts on them, and then have the subcommittee narrow it down a little bit.
Okay, that works for me too. Others should chime in if there's any objections. Okay.
Can I ask something about this?
Sure.
You know how the real estate agents and brokers and the I guess developers and property managers and all are required, I believe they're required to take training and implement fair housing so that they know what they're supposed to do in implementing fair housing rights. Is that the case also for tenant rights and being able so that the critical staff or all the staff in rental properties get trained on what the tenant rights are and how to educate the tenants about their rights and all of that. Does that exist for, now I'm talking about for tenants and occupants?
A requirement that they be trained on it?
Well, to be able, is there any requirement that at least the staff has to have some training on safety, health and safety, and code, and what the tenant rights are to be able to, if they think there's a problem in being, in the safety at property and, the whole scenario at the Serrano.
So Doris, I don't know of a legal requirement that like property managers have to be trained in like landlord tenant law. in the same way that there's a requirement that they take like fair housing training or things like that. So I don't believe so, but I could be wrong in that. But I do know that the General Assembly, I think it was 2020, adopted the requirement that with every lease, they have to provide like the tenant summary of like rights and protections under Virginia law. So the Department of Housing and Community Development maintains the list of like tenant. It's like a summary sheet of tenant rights and protections. Um, and I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, that that's supposed to be included with leases that are given out. But I could be conflating the two. Maybe it's just that it exists, but it's not required to be included. It's been a while since I have dealt with
Yeah,
that.
I'm just trying to be helpful here, and in terms of, the whole market and stuff also, a lot of people that are, a lot of people are in older properties that actually went condo, and then they're renting from developers who bought up apartments and stuff like that. So, I think that should be applied to, both rentals and all multifamily is what I'm trying to say. That,
I mean, yeah, we can add that as a.
but yeah, I just don't even know whether it's worthwhile. That's why I was asking it as a question. You guys can judge that, and whether it's in line with what you're talking about.
I mean, we can add it as another priority to require that like apartment owners or operators have to provide staff training on the Virginia Residential Landlord Tenant Act and their responsibilities versus like the tenant's responsibilities. I think that's fine to include for this round, and we can always consider later whether we want to move forward with it. I mean, I will say, just in my own experience with property managers, there's so much ignorance as to what the law is, but yet so much certainty on the part of property managers that they know what the law is, and they'll just say, "Oh, that would be illegal for us to do that." And it's like, "No, it's not. You have no idea what the law is. Like you're just I don't know who trained you, but that person did a really bad job." But I also know that a lot of those people don't get paid very well. There's a lot of turnover, so it's tough to, I think, find staff who have a lot of knowledge in this space just based off of what they get paid. Um, but yeah, I've talked to a lot of tenants who, too, have said the property manager said, "Oh, we have to do it this way because this is the law," and it's like they don't know what they're talking about.
Right?
But yeah, so I'm
Yeah,
happy to
but
include that.
so I brought that up because the one thing that sticks in my mind, because this is a 1972 building, and things like the elevator. Well, that's also an accessibility issue. But anyway, the spring of 2020, they decided that they were going to turn on the air conditioning early, and it was a frigid, you know, April, and they started before the codes even said that they were supposed to be able to do that, and it took occupants, and see, this is, occupants. Some of them are owner occupants, and some of them are renters, but but it took several weeks before we had any air conditioning, and they turned off the heat completely, and it was like 32 degrees during the day outside. So, so it's stuff like that. That, I mean, but there are the other things, the mold and the rest of it. But that's why I even mentioned it, because I think, we've got a lot of immigrants in here, and so anyway, that's why I brought it up.
Thanks, Doris. Okay, so number 4, And I think last year we decided to introduce these headers, so that's something we could do again. So enhanced anti-retaliation protections for tenants who form a tenant association, seek to enforce their rights under the Fair Housing Law, VRTLA, and Virginia Uniform Statewide Building Code, or raise grievances to their property manager or a landlord.
I think this is a big one, and I mean, this is like the first step that happens, right? If somebody's having an issue, they report it and then they're retaliated against. Like, I think this should be, I don't know, I'm kind of thinking also, and I know that we're going to talk about it later, but in terms of priority, like kind of being like, okay, this was one that can't really be put off, right? Because things are happening on a day-to-day and people are reporting stuff, like they should feel safe in doing so. So I think that we should keep this one.
Yep, that makes sense for sure.
I mean, all of these really just they intertwine with each other, right? Like if you have one, the other one makes sense. So
Right. Anyone else have thoughts on this one? Sorry about if you can hear the vacuum.
Yeah, I mean, this one, it came up both from the Serrano. We heard a lot of people talk about fear of retaliation, and I feel like we just hear that, especially from our Spanish-speaking and undocumented residents, like tenants, that they are very much fear retaliation. And no matter how many times I've had that conversation with like property owners and like, well, we would never do that. It's illegal. It's like, well, people are still very afraid of it. And we know it happens. And then we saw in the fair housing plan that was adopted, like the community feedback that they collected as part of that, that especially Spanish speaking residents in the DC metro area, that was a significant concern of theirs was retaliation. And that was why a lot of them did not report fair housing issues. So yeah, this one, I feel like, again, not saying that it gets included in the final thing, but I do think it's important.
Thanks, Kellen and Elizabeth. Okay, so the next one here, provide compensation for tenants whose units have been condemned through no fault of their own, so that property owner's failure to maintain the habitability of a unit or failure to comply with the law does not result in simply a forced eviction of the tenant. Sorry, Sarah.
I mean, I think that would make sense to leave in, but do we have the status of those bills from Delegate Lopez by any chance? Or they're kind of the current situation, political situation, they're just kind of stuck in a way. Do we know?
I mean, when he first introduced them in 2022 or no, 2023, they all died because Republicans killed them in the House. And then in this last session, I believe any tenant rights bills that made it out of the full General Assembly were vetoed by the governor.
Okay, so just like a lot of these are unfortunately at this goes back to you guys got to vote. People have to vote. And I will die on that hill. But and especially this year, the political landscape is going to be interesting. Is that kind of, I mean, we can put these out, and I think these are fantastic. We can feel we can only do so much that other places they can just simply say no, and other localities which is very unfortunate because every locality is different and their needs and wants are different. And I think this would help a lot of people. Some people don't want to see that, which is unfortunate. So
Yeah, I think Sarah, I mean, my view on it is repetition builds sort of a force of its own over time. And then eventually when the time is right, and the political powers align, things might get passed, but kind of showing time and again, I feel like you see that a lot, especially in the housing and tenant space in the General Assembly, that like bills get introduced and they get killed over and over again until finally it gets introduced and then it passes. But over time they build up support and then people are used to seeing it. They're like, oh yeah, like I like that bill. It's a shame that it failed. You saw that with like source of funds discrimination. You know, that was a dead on arrival bill. Like every session it was introduced until finally it passed. So yeah, I think for a lot of these, it's as a housing commission, we're saying this is what we think is important. We're not necessarily saying that we think these are all the most viable. And certainly we should probably think about viability somewhat when we make a recommendation. But yeah, I think it's more just this is what if we look at the needs of Arlingtonians, we think these are some of the most important housing needs from a legislative perspective.
Yeah, the needs of Arlingtonians, but also other localities in the state of Virginia that they could benefit from some of these things getting passed, which is just a shame that like, these but we're on tenants, like no fault of their own can get evicted because the property owner, and we're saying this is so important that they get compensation for it. And there's people that don't think that these tenants matter, which is just, again, not only in Arlington, but the rest of Virginia. So, I mean, it's just very unfortunate. And I go back to people need to start voting and start paying attention to things because it is so important. Because you never know who's going to affect. So, yes, I still think I agree with you, Kellen. We just got to kind of keep on beating that drum in that sense. Like these are important. Again, not only for Arlingtonians, but for everyone in the state of Virginia.
Yep, elections matter. These definitely have statewide impacts. Okay, so number 6 here, establish a Virginia mold remediation fund and provide free mold testing to Virginia residents. Require that landlords reimburse Virginia for mold testing and remediation if they do not address any mold issues identified through state testing within 20 days. If the landlord fails to remediate the mold, the state will carry out remediation for the tenant. And then we have some further recommendations here as well.
Yeah, I mean, again, this one stems from what we saw at the Serrano, and it's an attempt to get the state to proactively address mold, but have a way for landlords who are not fulfilling their obligations pay for it. This is one that, I think is important. And I will say last year, so again, this is the draft that we're looking at. The final that we sent, we only sent 4 legislative priorities last year to the county board. So we did narrow this down, but yeah, just want to add that context.
This seems to be, this is low-hanging fruit. There's federal law on lead-based paint that they have to follow and stuff like this. So this thing seems very reasonable. Right? I mean, you got there's federal law on lead paint. And especially if these landlords are taking federal vouchers or whatever. So this should be fairly non-controversial.
Yeah, I think with this one, because we talked to the county about it, and then separately, like not part of the housing commission, I think as part of the NAACP, I talked to legislators about the mold remediation one. and it's more so just convincing them that this is a priority over other things, right? If they have limited bills that they can put forward, and maybe I think it's just, and again, this is outside the scope of the Housing Commission because we're not really focused on the how do we sell the advocacy, but it hasn't resonated quite yet with legislators. So, but yeah, I think it's one that makes sense, and certainly one that a lot of Arlington residents have complained about and said that, hey, we want more things in place to make sure that we don't live in dangerous mold infested, units.
Well, I think the year trigger is 1977, so most of the stock should be already refurbished. So maybe this is a minimal issue in the county.
Sarah?
Yes, just kind of going on Helen's notion that we sent 4, and because of the current political climate, could we send a little bit more, maybe 7 or so, and see what the board could kind of pick and choose from? Like, let's just say number 6 is that lowest hanging fruit. We'll get that one in, or something like that, instead of like kind of condensing it into 4. I don't know if it's been talked about, but send them a little bit more and see if they could kind of maneuver it that could work for them this year. Is that a
Yeah.
possibility?
Yeah, sorry for this is the latest one I could find in my email. I clearly missed the final one, so sorry for pulling the more expanded earlier version. And then to your point about sending more than 4, I mean, I think it's really up to us as a commission what we want to do. I will say at the top, we talked about how in past years the commission has typically only taken 1 or 2, and so just keeping that in mind as as we decide what we want to do. But I mean, ultimately, I think it's our decision how many we want to send, and it's really just based on how much time folks have to flesh them out, and what we decide on when we discuss narrowing down the larger list.
Okay, thank you.
Helen, do you agree?
Yeah, I mean it's totally up to us. I think this year too, I can talk to Matt and Susan about this earlier than last year. I think last year the conversation that I had was closer to when they'd already developed like the drafts, and I think I talked to their legislative like advocacy person. But yeah, I think there's more engagement and if there's other members of the commission who want to help with that, with talking to our liaisons, to make sure that they fully understand what we're proposing before they get the draft from their staff on this is what staff thinks they should focus on. So that instead of trying to amend what staff has already put together, they're telling staff in advance, hey, this is important. Can you make sure you include this from the Housing Commission? So I think that's a piece of it too, that last year I was probably a little late in being able to have those conversations. So this year I'd like to do that probably right in the September timeframe.
Okay, yeah, that sounds good. That makes sense, aligning with what their staff is focusing on, should make things more streamlined, and hopefully a greater, likelihood of adoption. Okay, so number 7 here from this earlier list, expand the list of provisions in the Uniform Statewide Building Code related to recognized standards of health and safety required to be present in buildings and structures to include standards related to the accumulation and growth of mold, plumbing leaks or issues, air conditioning and heating equipment, and running hot water, and the removal of lead paint and paint that is flaking. Okay,
I
well,
don't-
unless,
Yeah, I
What-
mean, I don't have an issue with this one again staying on the list of things we consider. I don't know that it would be in my top ones anymore, but I think it's fine for us to consider.
Elizabeth?
Would it be I mean, I would have to see the wording for the one before this, but I mean, these both deal with the standards of living and ensuring that people are living in a mold-free home or apartment. Would we be able to kind of combine those, or are they that different that they would need to be two separate points?
They're talking about amending different parts of state code.
Oh, okay.
So they're around similar topics, but one is basically setting up a new program that would probably fall under like DHCD. I think that's Department of Housing and Community, Development. And then the other is amending the state building code. So they are pretty different.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have a problem with it being on there either.
Great. Thanks, Cal and Elizabeth. Okay, so that's the list from last year. Jason, not to put you on the spot, but I could share the document you created if you want to go through some of the ones you were thinking of, or if you want to bring those to the next meeting, that's fine. We can go over them. For when folks add to the larger list, we could just add yours to the larger list and go over them at the larger meeting. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the larger meeting will be fine. But there's one, do you mind if I just kind of bring back one of the ones we talked about earlier?
Sure.
Regarding so I was just kind of checking, the Arlington, modifying Arlington's affordable housing dwelling ordinance and the statute that was that Richard thankfully provided in the chat, which is the exact same as what we have. When are we recommending? Obviously, we'll recommend a change. Ours hasn't changed in 17 years. And I think it definitely would be worthwhile to update it. Can we also include a study or model to review the different things that we may want to change in it so that we can make the appropriate tweaks, in terms of, do we want to increase cash contribution? Do we want to increase, on-site, like, from 5% up or off-site some point, all those different aspects. Like, I'm not sure, are we, like, I know we want a change, but are we going to recommend certain things, or could we, my ask is that could we commission a study to look at these different aspects and look at the impacts of the current supply that we have in our current market, because the AHO, Affordable Housing Ordinance report that was done pretty much concluded that there's a big imbalance between the cash contribution and the requirements to do on-site or off-site units. So like most developers choose cash contribution, but I think it would be definitely worthwhile to do another study to look at what tweaks we want to make and see how many what levers we want to pull in terms of raise or lower different aspects of that ordinance, and see how many more affordable dwellings we get at other potential trade-offs in less overall units or total units being done based on different modeling projections. So that's like what I'm thinking, if we could like attach that to our ask, or would that already be done in the Housing Commission, if Virginia Housing Commission or others, or like how that would be funded, because that could be like, what, like $1 million or whatever a study of like that nature would cost.
So I think
So go ahead, Nikki.
I'll probably defer to you, but I'll just say, I think from what Kellen was saying previously, like some of that work would be done if we were able to establish a separate subcommittee to look at the affordable housing ordinance. But I would defer to Kellen on how much we want to get into the granular details for this round of our legislative priorities, because we know, based on what Matt and Susan and the rest of the board had said around the likelihood of this even happening, but just defer to Kellen on more.
I don't think the county would be interested in having the state do a study on Arlington's law and ordinance. I think if the county wanted a study, the county would just pay for a study themselves. And I don't think the county has any interest in doing that right now. It didn't make it into staff's plans for fiscal year 25. Like the board just doesn't want to focus on this now. And yes, that was basically the point of the subcommittee was to be able to look at those things and be able to say specifically, here's what we think should be changed. I think this recommendation is going to be more high level because we just won't be able to do some of that data. I think it's possible that groups like Navaja may be looking into some analysis on it, but you know, I can't say for sure. But yeah, I don't think there's appetite at the county level currently to do a study. And I think there's probably even less appetite for the board to have the state do a study and then have the state tell the county how they think Arlington's program should work. But I totally get your point that like, yes, you want to have that data. I don't think the county board is very interested in getting that data at the moment.
Nice. Yeah, no, I think even like if we did a subcommittee, some of that work, I'm like, I don't know about everyone else here, but like I know I wouldn't be able to do some of this like things that I've seen, like the modeling and stuff, like that's like above my pay grade. So, but yeah.
The subcommittee in theory is going to pull in outside experts from the community who could help with some of that. And there's definitely folks who like I had talked to who'd be able to do that. But it's not happening. So maybe in the future. But yeah, I mean, my goal for this particular recommendation is just to put on the record that the commission supports having the law changed and improved. And then the specifics, hopefully over time we'll be able to engage in that conversation of what that should be.
Awesome. That sounds great. Thanks for the clarity. And I think that's good.
So Nikki, did you want people to volunteer other items? I know Doris mentioned the Virginia Residential Landlord Tenant Act training for like property managers and owners. Did you want people to just talk about other things that they had? Like I know Jason had sent his list. I mean, I don't have an issue going through what Jason provided during this meeting. I think we have until 9, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it's again, defer to you. It's your meeting, but yeah, however you want to spend the rest of it.
Yeah. I don't want to, Jason, it sounded like you wanted to go through it at the larger call. I think that would be fine. And then if folks have ideas now, we can talk about them, or if folks want to take time. I know for me, I think I'd want to do some more additional research and maybe come prepared ready for our next meeting to share some more recommendations. So I don't want to put anyone on the spot to come up with all their ideas now, but like Kellen said, we have another 45 minutes if folks have ideas now. Yeah, Elizabeth?
I did want to bring up, I know that there's like the tenant commission, but where does rental assistance fall? Like if we wanted to advocate for more funds toward that, would that fall under us or would that be the other commission?
So we have jurisdiction over anything that's housing. And
Okay.
we have overlapping jurisdiction with the Tenant Landlord Commission.
Okay. Yeah, because I think that's one that I would like to explore. Like, granted, my knowledge is limited on the rental programs, right? But it's when I've talked to other people in the community, particularly in the Latino community, that always comes up where it's like, hey, we should be supporting rental assistance policies in terms of funds and then also education. So that'd be one for me.
So just some context on that too. There was a law that was passed that required the administration, the governor's administration, to come up with a voucher program, a state voucher program that would be somewhat similar to the federal housing choice voucher program. So his administration, I think it was in 2022, released a um, a proposed program. The governor neither endorsed it or said he didn't like it. He just didn't say anything really about it. The legislature didn't end up adopting it. I know there were some advocacy groups that were calling for a pilot version of it to move forward, but it didn't make it into the budget. But yeah, I mean, we can include as part of our recommendation that they fund that, or start, because currently the state does not have a voucher or like a rental assistance program in place.
Yeah, I think that would be a good one to have. At least, to have the committee discuss it and see whether it, fits within our priorities. And then another one, this is maybe a little bit more ambiguous, but like fair housing laws. I like I said, it's a little bit broad, but I think discussing ways that we could support that. I don't know if it's I don't know if it's like too broad or one of those things of like we would need to look at the policies that are in place or how we would even come to a conclusion that somebody was denied housing because of XYZ, but maybe a topic to discuss with a greater committee on how we could um, be better at advocating for stronger policies that could kind of go against like unfair, have it be more equitable across the board in terms of support for the person that wants to, live somewhere.
I think, Elizabeth, if you're able before the next meeting to delve a little bit more into
Yeah.
specifically like what you wanted us to look at. I mean, we do. So the county has their adopted fair housing plan from last year, that has a whole bunch of strategies and goals, for us as well as the region. If there's specific things that you think at the state level are needed, I mean, one, and we talked about it last year, I think, was increasing funding for the Office of Fair Housing, for the state, because they have a huge backlog, and they just don't have enough funding to handle all the cases that come before them. Um, although it also sounds like the Attorney General's office doesn't plan to prosecute any fair housing cases, um, which is unfortunate. But yeah, so there are things at the state level just with like allocating more resources towards fair housing because it tends to not get a lot of money.
Yeah, I'll dive a little bit more into that. Because as I was saying it out loud, I was like, wow, this is a very broad statement I'm about to make, but wanted to bring it up. And then, sorry, just one last one, and then I'll be done. I was thinking about our last meeting and the subcommission that Katie brought up. The name escapes me at the moment, but we're talking about efficiency, climate change, all of that. I don't know if there would be a way to advocate for more sustainable materials, like if developers are coming in to build different like buildings or complexes or anything like that, where we could advocate for sustainable and like green initiatives there. Again, broad. I'll try to narrow it down a little bit for the next one, but trying to figure out how we can tie the work that the other subcommissions are doing to legislative priorities that we want to put together.
Yeah, and certainly we can ask the C2E2 commission if they have any legislative priorities that may be related to residential housing that we could consider. That would be a good thing to ask Katie if she could ask that as part of her discussions with them.
Awesome. Yeah, that's all I had.
Hey, Callum, I would like to emphasize, I think the state voucher program, I really think we should push. Politically, all the governors now are getting involved in affordable housing at the federal level, the president, et cetera. Treasury just announced Yellen just announced a plan today for more housing production. So I think the time is right. And you can almost, with all due respect, embarrass the governor because all of his other governors, including Republicans, are getting into the affordable housing thing. So I think a state voucher program, even Texas has a state housing voucher program that they worked extremely well during COVID. So I really would put that on the list.
Thanks, Joe. And I will try to find the proposal that his staff came up with. It was really interesting because they essentially like didn't look at political viability when they came up with it. They just said, if we could design an ideal program, like what would it be? And so it was like crazy expansive. Like it would be amazing to have this program, but it would cost a fortune. And that's why I think groups were like, well, maybe if you just pilot it for like some of the populations. But yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense to include as one of our recommendations to consider, and we can ultimately see if that rises to, the final list that we want to put forward. But
He would be hard pressed. He would be hard pressed to veto something like that.
you may be giving him more credit than I will.
Well, you know what I'm saying. I think in this environment, if this thing was crafted correctly, and let me tell you, after what Biden and Yellen did today, you never can tell. Trump may even come out with something soon. So hope springs eternal.
Yeah, I think the challenge was just the General Assembly itself just didn't make it into either budget, the House or the Senate. I don't know why I mean, generally when I talk to legislators, again, not having my housing commission hat on, I always hear there's no new appetite for spending. Like there's no appetite for adding new programs, especially
Right.
not big programs, right?
Right.
So I always hear that, and I think maybe this falls under one of those like, we don't want to start a whole new program that people are gonna come
Right.
back. But I think it's a great idea, and we should have
Well,
this
they could
instead.
copy someone else's program, but if they look at the polling, affordable housing is right up there. All right. So call him at his game.
Can I ask, had, a state voucher program, would that address the people who are on waiting list for housing choice vouchers and have no other place to turn? Is that the idea? In other words, instead of having to wait for years
That could
on
be a very that could be a factor. I mean, you're just providing more resources out there. So, you know,
But it wouldn't be used on top of, I mean, or is the vision that it be used? There's no reason, right, to use it in combination with housing, the housing choice voucher program,
I don't,
right?
yeah, I don't think the intent
You
of
can't
at
bring
least
it down further, so it would have to be people
no.
who are shut out now, right?
Yeah, I think when the administration proposed like their draft program, it was for the people who currently do not receive housing choice vouchers or other type of assistance. But under whatever criteria they came up with, whether it be like they're a veteran and they make under a certain amount of money, or they're a working family with, income restrictions, that they would be eligible. So yeah, I don't think it would be something that would be paired with like someone who's
And
already receiving a voucher.
and then would it look more like the home program TBRA? Because they're like, if you're using that, and I don't think you guys are using that in Arlington, but if when we were using that home TBRA program in Fairfax to try to get people out of nursing homes. It was more restricted than the housing choice voucher. It wasn't portable because it was tied to the consolidated plan in Fairfax. So it was a TBRA certificate, but it was limited to use within the county and things like that. So, would this be something, and I'm asking these questions only to, make sure that, to try to develop our own vision for a state voucher. Would it be more like a program that you would have to use within the state of Virginia? You couldn't port it someplace else and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, if it was a state program, I don't think they would allow porting across state border.
Yeah, so just a quick question. I think maybe Joe or Kellen could answer. So like, let's say the state does this the voucher program. In Arlington, I'm just thinking back to our briefing that we had on housing grants, and then how that interfaces the grants and vouchers interface with people, going from like neat step up from their 30%, but then the voucher gets them to 60% AMI. Like, if let's say the state does this, would we now be able as Arlington to say, hey, let instead of spending that money on the housing grant, we could spend them in other affordable housing, perhaps development or other things? Because, like, let's say, like, if is there going to be the situation where we get people with housing grants competing with people with Virginia state vouchers competing for, like, I'm not like competing in the sense, but like, would that be kind of how it works, where like now that with the state program, Arlington can spend less on this and then spend on other affordable housing AHIP things? Would that be how it would work, or would that be supplemental? And then would we still have enough like CAFs units for the influx, or would it be like not large enough to make a difference? Like, I'm just trying to see the scale of how this would impact Arlington in terms of like
I would
ranges.
be really surprised if it was big enough to supplant the housing grant program. So we currently have about 1,500 housing choice voucher recipients, and we have about 1,600 housing grant recipients. Housing choice vouchers cost, what is it, like $24 million a year from HUD. If the state developed a program that could even spend $24 million just on Arlington residents, that would be huge. I think that is very unlikely. I think that the state, whatever they develop, is going to have very, very strict criteria, and maybe a couple people from Arlington. Like, it'd probably be more like permanent supportive housing in terms of like maybe, I don't know, like 50 to 100 people. Actually, I don't know the numbers of people in Arlington who are in that, but yeah, I doubt that they're gonna start putting like billions of dollars into this program like HUD does.
You know where it could almost be tailored. We have a big problem with elderly and the path forward people, all those people that are housing people that really you see them in nursing homes. They really need permanent housing, reform drug addicts, stuff like that. So you can almost tailor it for a specific need, but you would not politically, you don't want it to supplant what's already there. You want it additive because there is such a big need and stuff like that. And that's how you justify it.
Yeah, I did
Well,
want to
actually,
add.
that's what the SHRAP is. That's what the SHRAP program is. It's based on a voucher kind of thing, but they had to do it because they were under a court order to do something to get people out of the IDDD, the state institutions, But the SHRAP, statewide rental assistance program for IDDD, that's where that came from. And I don't know whether they're going to run out of funding. The court has not, released the state from saying, okay, now you've complied with Olmsted, but it was an Olmsted suit that brought forth that SHRAP program.
I did
But it
want
works
to.
just like the housing choice voucher.
I did want to add another one, and this one is probably more controversial, but rent stabilization. So every year, delegate, why am I forgetting his name? But young black guy from, I think, like Central Virginia. Like he's very young. I think he's like 27 or something. Nadarius Clark, right? So he's introduced a bill um, to allow localities to adopt rent stabilization. This is an issue that every time I talk to Arlington renters, the number one issue that they have is my rent is going up way too fast. And it's crazy. And just even this year, I've had so many friends and people say like my rent is going up by 20% or more. And it's ridiculous. And I think that we would be much better served in Arlington if we had the ability to put a cap on it. Yeah, I think we should include it as one of the priorities to consider.
I abstain.
That's fine. And I know not everyone, not everyone needs to be in support of that. And ultimately, we'll go with what the majority says. But I think it's worth discussing. And because again, this is all the other legislation that we proposed. The thing that I hear from actual renters in Arlington the most is what is the county gonna do to stop my rent from increasing so drastically? Like I can't afford this. And all the other programs, like they don't really get at that at its heart. But yeah, that's my thought.
And
I mean,
Kellen, just to say real quick, I think it's definitely worth this. I mean, I happen to disagree, but I think it's worthy to have this discussion. Even though I think in the commission and community, there's I think this is controversial. I mean, in the sense of Arlington, not other places around the country, but well, other places. But I think it's worth discussing the pros and cons and perhaps find a different come to some sort of maybe I don't want to say state study or regional thing or different options that we could look at to have some sort of compromise or at least really weigh in on what what we can do and alternatives if not stabilization or other things. But I would very much love to have the conversation and discuss the implications.
I mean, on that note, it's going to be interesting with the whole real page that's been also in the news with certain developments and how that might affect things. But I guess we'll just have to wait and see what comes from that as well. Yeah, so I can't, yeah, at this point, I can see yeah, I'll just leave it at that right now.
Yeah. And thank you for mentioning real pay. I agree with Jason. I think we should discuss it just because we should be discussing it because it's a big issue. But there's many downsides on it. But maybe and a lot of communities are going through the same thing. And it kind of defeats the other stuff that we're trying to do because you think missing middle's an issue. This thing is even worse than missing middle. So.
Yeah, and certainly, I mean, the bill has died every year I don't know if it's made it to the full committee, if it's made it out of subcommittee. So even Democrats are not all on board with rent stabilization. I recognize that, but like you all said, I think it's worthy to discuss. Again, it's something that this is the #1 issue and topic that I hear from renters in Arlington is why is the county not doing something to stop my rent from increasing so much every year? And I mean, the answer is because they don't have the authority to do anything about that. But looking at giving them that authority, I think, is a worthy discussion. And again, I don't even know if a majority of our county board would support having that power if they were able to. I know I previously talked to members of the board, and not all of them, did support it. But we have a different board right now, and we'll have a different one next year. So, yeah, something to talk about and see how the commission feels, and we'll decide ultimately what we put forward and what we decide not to.
Should
I
be a
can
good-
I can go ahead and how do we, Nikki, want to handle sharing information like background information? So Jason, I think what you sent was super helpful. I will say I wouldn't do a Google sheet in the future because if we start making contemporaneous changes, it technically violates like the FOIA stuff. But having people send information to the whole, I guess, commission or subcommittee, because we don't know exactly who's on the subcommittee. It's like, I guess, whoever shows up, is helpful as like background information. Like for rent stabilization, I'd want to send people a link to Nadarius Clark's bill so they can see like what has been proposed in the past. And I think there may actually have been 2 bills that were proposed in the last session. And same thing with other, priorities that we've discussed. Like if there's bills associated with it, or people have additional information or research, I think it's helpful to try to send that in advance, if people can. But Nikki, do you have a preference on the best way to do that? Do you want stuff sent to you and Alex, and then it'll get sent out to everyone, or just have people send it to the whole group?
I don't really have a preference. I mean, I don't know if we could at least start like a shared folder on Google Drive of PDFs so that people can't edit things. Just so everything is in one place. Although I guess we could just have people send things around, and I can just be responsible for compiling it in a single place and maybe link that in emails, so that there's always like a repository for people to refer back to.
Alex, is there any issue with doing that?
I don't think so. Yeah, so if everyone could individually send their information to Nikki and I, CC me as well, then Nikki, I'll keep a folder. You're welcome to as well, but I'll keep a folder in our files as well. And I can send out all of the compiled information, a week or so ahead of the next meeting, whatever works for the subcommittee.
Okay, that sounds good to me.
And I'm realizing, so it was called the Virginia Housing Stability Fund, the like voucher program that was proposed, and I'm gonna send you all what was proposed. Well, send it to Alex and Nikki, and then you guys can distribute, so that people can see that. Because I think a lot of people weren't even aware that that happened. And that was also 2022 when they developed it, for the 2023 session. So it was actually longer ago than I thought.
Thanks, Kellen. So I think we have a lot of good items that we've talked about tonight that we want to bring up to add to the larger list. Anything else that folks have they want to talk about now?
Just a question. When would the next meeting be? Is it in July?
Yeah, so I think the next larger housing commission meeting is July 11th. Does that sound right, Kellen and Alex?
No, I mean the subcommittee that will discuss the bills in.
Oh, so we don't have a date for that. So I guess maybe that's what we should talk about. So do we want to bring like the larger list to the next July Housing Commission meeting? No. Okay. Okay, so we want to keep it within the subcommittee.
Yeah, I think we can report out like what we've been talking about, but I don't think we're ready to take it to the full commission. I'd like to get us. I mean, I was kind of thinking we'd meet over the summer and then by like September present to the whole commission, here's what we recommend.
Okay, so that sounds good. So if we were to have a meeting maybe late July, does that give folks enough time to have their list together of things they want to discuss at our next call? I see some nodding heads, but Elizabeth also, okay, great. Okay, so we can plan for that. Yeah, okay. Anything else then? Kellen, does that work for you too?
Sorry, I just found the report that I was gonna send to you both. Sorry, can you say one more time what the question was?
So if everyone's able to get their list together by end of July time, so basically a month-ish from now, we'll have another subcommittee meeting where we can discuss the larger list and what we want to bring to the Housing Commission. The larger
Yeah,
Housing Commission.
I think end of July makes sense.
Okay, great. And then by then too, would we be able to have an update on maybe what the county staff is thinking to recommend to the board?
Oh no, they're not gonna tell us.
Oh, okay.
I mean, county, it's really the like, I don't know who's involved in it other than like the lobbyists for the county, but that they share that with the board and then it goes public. They're not going to tell us what they're planning. But basically, like, we want to talk to board members in the fall so that the board can direct their staff to consider certain items for inclusion in, their draft legislative priorities.
I see. Got it.
That
Okay.
was, yeah.
Sorry, I kind of mixed up the flow of that. Okay. All right. Well, I'm not opposed to ending early, but want to make sure everyone had a chance to discuss what they wanted to tonight. So any final thoughts here in our last 15 minutes? Okay. All right. So I will send out another Google form so we can make sure folks have a chance to say when they're available. Kellen, I know you mentioned like who's on this subcommittee. Do we need to formally establish that, or can I just continue to send the Google form to the larger group?
Alex, I think we're supposed to officially establish who the members of the subcommittee are. Is that correct?
Technically, yes. But yeah, that could only be 2 members. So it would be Nikki and one other. So yes, technically there needs to be 2 official members of the subcommittee. So Nikki and one more.
But if we only have 2, does that mean only 2 people get to vote, or everyone can still vote who shows up? But
No, everyone can still vote. Everyone who's a member of the full commission will be a member of the subcommittee when they attend those meetings. But there does need to technically be 2 official members of the subcommittee. But that is kind of just a requirement. Up to you all who that second person would be. Yeah.
Yeah, Nikki, I leave that up to you to identify who that person is. I mean, I think we just need to make sure that whoever is an official member is going to be at the next meeting, so that we have quorum. So that's the main concern there. I mean, I plan to be there. I would assume, Joe, Sarah, Elizabeth, and Jason, and I think Zach wants to. It seems like he was interested and wanted to try to make it, but so yeah, it's you can pick if you want to say 3 people, that's fine.
Okay. Kellen, do you want to be the official second person?
I can. Yeah, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, it's a strange formality.
It is a strange formality. It can be decided at a later date, and it could be whoever can attend the next meeting. It's not, super strict. It's just whoever is at the next meeting needs to technically be a member.
Okay. Well, why don't we send out the Google form and see from there who can attend, and then we can establish for this odd formality. Okay. Well, appreciate everyone's
And
time. Yeah.
One other question, sorry. Alex, does the next meeting have to be in person or can it be virtual?
I believe we can stick with virtual for the subcommittees. I can double check on that again, but I believe we're allowed to do all subcommittee meetings virtual.
Okay. Cool. And I do believe starting in July 1st, everyone has to have the camera on for all the virtual meetings.
So, what we did adopt at our last meeting is what the current policy is. So, to answer that question, it would be no, you do not have to have your cameras on at the virtual meetings yet. I did get word though that the update we did was really just to update it so that we could get 50% of our meetings virtual instead of 25. There will be another version coming down soon that incorporates, the newer language and the new law that was just passed. So there will be another electronic meetings policy in the next couple months here. Exactly when, I'm not sure. But for now, you do not need to have your cameras on at virtual meetings.
Okay, so we don't have to follow the law until we pass this policy?
That is what I've been told.
Okay, that's it's up to the lawyers, I guess. Sounds good.
Okay. All right. Well, I mean, always feel free to turn your camera on. It's good for connecting. Okay. So I guess we can end the meeting now. Appreciate everyone's time.
See you July 11th.
Yeah.
Thank
See you
you.
all then. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.